Welcome to the Shared Roots Podcast.
Welcome to the Shared Roots Podcast, where culture, community, and stories of resilience come alive. In each episode, we hear directly from voices across our communities as they share how our roots in the land, in our traditions, and in each other have shaped and continue to shape the agricultural landscape of Southern California region. I'm your host, Areli Perez.
I'm your host, Paul Maschka. The Shared Roots podcast is produced by the Asian Culture and Media Alliance, or ACMA, a nonprofit organization dedicated to promoting unity, awareness, and empowerment through media arts.
This series is part of the Share Roots Initiative, one of 4 projects funded through the University of California Agricultural and Natural Resources UCANR, under the Climate Action and Land Equity Project, also known as CALE. UCANR cultivates thriving communities, sustainable agriculture, and resilient ecosystems across California by developing equitable, science-based solutions that empower people and the planet. Paul, I'm really excited to co-host this podcast with you, and I would love if our audience learned a little bit more about what you do. You have a lot of gifts that you share with our community, and I would love for people to hear about them.
Thanks, Areli. I'm excited too. Yeah, interesting. So I grew up in this region, farming, gardening, and eventually got into education of regenerative agriculture or ecological agriculture. It was kind of just a way for me to express my concern with the environment and human health. And since I was a kid, I've been growing food and farming, and definitely have dedicated myself towards teaching these different practices, along with becoming like a lifelong student, because so many things kind of get revealed to you over the years as you put some time into it. There's just many things, and the land access situation is something I think is really something we should focus on. So I think that's probably about enough about me. So,
Yeah.
And I'm excited to work with you on this project. And I know we've farmed a lot together and taught a lot of farming in the past, and tell the audience a little bit about you.
Yeah, thanks, Paul.
Sure.
It's fun to hear about your background, and I guess my introduction into farming is really connected to you in that way, as you were one of my first teachers. I'm first generation, born and raised in California, and my family is from southern Mexico in a place called Oaxaca, and we are from a Zapotec village in the northern Sierras called San Pablo Macuiltianguis. Shout out to all the San Pablo Macuiltianguenses that might be listening. Maybe they are, I don't know. And as first generation, my parents worked a lot, and we didn't have many opportunities to be outdoors or had a backyard or garden. So I didn't grow up farming or gardening, even though we really are just one generation removed from a land-based type of living. My grandmother grew her family's food. My dad grew up in his village. And so growing up in the city, I saw the inequities, especially as a child of immigrants, and I always felt like I wanted to help people. So I went to college because that's a path that I was told I had to follow to succeed in this country. And I decided I really wanted to focus on public health issues because I saw a lot of disparities in our communities. And so post-college, I got hired onto a project to look at childhood obesity in our region, particularly along the U.S.-Mexico border. And we were looking at this area with the high density of liquor stores and looking at the comparison of why there's so much childhood obesity in these communities. And the correlation was, yeah, you have a lot of convenience liquor stores, but you don't have a lot of grocery store access. And so access was an issue, and that got my wheels turning. I'm like, okay, if access is an issue, it's not the only issue, what's something else that's missing? And the piece that I saw, and around the same time that I was getting involved in this work, if anyone listening is familiar with Olive Wood Garden, it had just, the idea of Olive Wood Garden had just come to fruition. And the executive director was one of my high school mentors. And so she kind of brought me on board, and I started to follow that work of community gardens and farming. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. And that's when I met you. I met Wild Willow Farm, which is located in Tijuana River Valley, no longer there, unfortunately. And I saw the possibility about learning about ag and regenerative ag and how that could potentially support our community's well-being. And that's kind of what led me down this path of wanting to learn, not just to learn how to grow, but how to share that with people. So something that really inspires me is teaching, is sharing it, especially with children and with adolescents. So that's a big part of what drew me to this work, is knowing that there's a different way to live, and our ancestors knew it, and we're remembering how to do that. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and an issue for people like myself and small agricultural projects, small-scale farmers, is that we don't have access to land. And so from your perspective, Paul, like when we talk about land access, can you give us your perspective on an overarching look at what does that even mean?
Yeah, it's really fascinating. Do we want to get into the history of it, or just?
Yeah, why not? Let's go there.
Yeah, because when you really look at it, and this is in prehistory. This happened well before there was any kind of written language. So, it's recorded in human history, but not really like written down history. And things happen fast. Before there was this concept of people of humans owning land. It was accessible to everyone. It started with the kind of the invention of agriculture. We learned how to not really manipulate the environment, but kind of to work with it and try to grow more food than what was around us seasonally. They started by just noticing different environments, and where things grew really well, they could actually gather those seeds, and then they would recognize other places that they thought were similar, and then spread those seeds. And they looked at that as like, they kind of threw a name on it called proto-agriculture. So that was just us, or as early humans, carrying seeds and growing more of something that we knew we could come back later and collect, which now kind of drove more of like a village setting, and didn't happen overnight. And there's all different types of iterations of this. But in a nutshell, it started to happen where they realized they needed a lot more food to stay there full time. And so they started to alter the landscape, maybe burn things down or cut things away, take away more native plants, and then introduce what they felt was a food source, grains and legumes, and then a lot of animal production. And at that juncture between hunter-gatherer and agriculturalists, there was this thing that started to happen where these societies of people decided that they wanted to like control that land, and there was land ownership was kind of invented right after agriculture was invented, keeping other people away from the foraging those areas or hunting those areas or fishing those areas, and they basically started to like attempt to own the land, which is a really unnatural, odd thing, because there's no other organisms on this planet that like own land. And here we are, this artificial thing of owning land. And from that point on, they grew societies. They started to now need to protect the land that they're claiming. And then they had to have soldiers, and they had to have policing, and then entire societies grew. So as a result, all these inequities were created, where there's people that don't have land to forage, to farm, and this whole empowerment system really just changed human history in a big way. So it was, it sounds weird that the invention of agriculture it caused this landslide of unequal land access. It basically invented capitalism, and that's the system we're in today. And fast forward from Europe to the Americas, the traveling across the ocean using these big ships, they called the time of discovery, which is kind of a misnomer, because it was already discovered by people that were in the native lands. So the way that history is written, it's really, really kind of interesting. But through the Americas, North and South America, there was tons of just odd activities that happened because these supposedly advanced cultures came here to get things. And it was the resources, it was the land, it was the spices, it was like mineral rights, it was the knowledge, everything. And super dark stories. And that's what's in this basket here is a handful of glass beads that were from the time of when the British came and traded glass beads for land. And it's just such a sad and dark story that some of these really, manipulating activities went on. So, and here we are today with the system that we're in place. Again, it's not too much different. There are people that definitely have all the privilege in the world to find a place to grow some food. And it's odd, I think about my upbringing, my background. From the moment that I can remember, we had a space to grow some food. And from that point on, everywhere that I've gone, I've had the privilege to, there's a plot of land somewhere. Not a huge plot of land, but I could grow food if I want to. I could connect with the earth if I want to. I could, and it's a strange feeling to recognize that that's been my background, that I haven't had this really intense situation where I'm taken away from land. I've had the privilege to connect and luckily learn through Mother Nature and in the entire ecosystem. So it's hard for me to step in the shoes of people that don't have land access. We do see it a lot. It's obvious. There's a race divide. There's a ethnic divide, and it's something that we had to really work on. And I think that this series will come up with some ideas, not solutions, I don't think, but at the same time, we just need to put this to the forefront that it's a real thing. And I know both of us just recently, we've gone through something with the loss of Wild Willow Farm. So it is, you can get a sense of when you're working on a piece of land, you're gardening or farming, and you have a connection with that land, and you're literally tending that land, because we didn't own it. We were the caretakers of it. We were the stewards of it. And it was a teaching place at the same time. So it has all these different levels of value for other people and for us personally. And then it was closed from people in power that decided that project didn't have any value anymore, or it had more problems, or it cost them too much. So dollar and cents decision was made to close that farm. And that was I wouldn't say that was the first time I've had that feeling. I've had this feeling of something ripped from you. And I could see that this is something that people feel all the time. This happens to them. They're gardening or farming somewhere, and I think both of those are really good terms to put together. Gardening is a place where you're going to have sanctuary. It's a place where you're going to, it's almost like therapy for yourself, but you're also growing for you. You're developing community. You're growing food for other people. You're growing medicine. You can be growing many other things, and then when it's out of your control and it's taken from you, it's like a family member was taken away, or a limb was cut off, and it's sorry, it's a really hard situation to to manage. And if you don't have any access to it or any power in it, and it's taken from you, it's a powerful thing. I know we're also right at the same time we're dealing with a situation with the Tijuana River Valley Community Garden isn't threatened to be closed. It's the second largest community garden in California, and they think it's probably one of the most diverse gardens in the country, and so it seems that it's going to be saved. But here, this second blow of land being taken away is just. Especially when you see an entire community, literally thousands of people will be affected negatively. So that land will just be ripped from them. And that's something that's I've been really dealing with, and I know you have too, and a number of hundreds of other people have. And it appears that it's going to be saved, but it was on the verge. The decision was made to close it, which was, it just brings this whole challenge kind of to the surface. And I think that's something that we need to work on addressing, because people's connection to land and not just land, but also the space where they can grow their cultural food. It's part of, it literally is what they're made of, is those foods. So I think that's really important. So I really appreciate this series and this opportunity that we're going to get to go over these issues with people, and we'll see what we get to at the end. So yeah, thanks.
Something you said really stood out to me. This is a way that people to connect. I think, especially as the product of immigration, like very recent immigration. A lot of us are immigrants, but very recent. I know that for me, it's the disconnect from the land that my parents were born on has created some unconscious, pain and grief. And by tending the land that I currently live on, it gives me a sense of belonging that as an immigrant, you don't easily feel. And so sometimes when I think about indigeneity specifically, I think about the fact that we're all indigenous to this planet, and that wherever your ancestors were born, it's important to acknowledge it and to respect it and to love it, but also to acknowledge that the land that you currently live on is the one that's feeding you, probably, hopefully, and it's also like giving you life, air, water. And so you're indigenous to wherever you're standing on. And so I think that's something that agricultural and gardening, I personally relate and identify more as a gardener, just because it's a little bit slower pace and I'm not always in a rush to make money off of gardening, whereas farming, there's an incentive, a business incentive sometimes. And so I think that access to land is important in so many different regards. Health, not just physical, but mental and spiritual health as well.
Yeah.
You mentioned like the history of the settlers coming to this continent and the impacts that caused, the impacts it caused back then during that time. But also I want to point out a few different policies that have occurred throughout the years that have kind of shaped the agricultural landscape of our region in Southern California. And I think it's important to mention this because these policies that were implemented have led to the inequity we see in land access today, not just the land grab that happened when the settlers arrived, but a lot of these policies. So first you had the Spanish mission system, which took all the land from the indigenous first peoples of this nation, of this continent, and forced them into labor. And then you had Mexico, at least we're talking here specifically about California, Southern California. Then you had the Mexican rancho system, which then divided the land even more amongst very wealthy landowners. And so when the Mexico-U.S. war occurred, now you had the land that belonged to all these wealthy Mexican rancheros that was taken and given to now the wealthy new Californians that had established themselves. And so you had power land grabs happen multiple times in those first early, like 200, 250 years. And then you had like the development of California, the gold rush. And they implemented something called the Homestead Act, and that included massive railroad loan grants. And so they were trying to get people from the east to the west. And so they were giving large pieces of land to these railroad companies, which required a lot of Asian immigrants to build those railroads. And at the same time, those Asian American farmers that were being born here, that first generation of Asian American, they faced a lot of legal barriers to actually own land. They had something called the alien land laws. So as an Asian American, you could not own land in California or in the country. And so when we think about that, we think about generational wealth, right? The generational wealth that's been accumulated since the arrival of the settlers. And now you have Asian Americans, Mexican Americans. You had the Bracero program, which brought labor in from Mexico to work on the farms. It's still happening today. We're still bringing in labor in from Mexico, from Central America. And so you have these two groups of people, along with African Americans that have been also very oppressed in this country, that don't have generational wealth, don't have access to that land that the white settlers have been able to pass on to their children and generations thereafter. And so that has caused the major inequities that we face today here in California with land access.
Yep.
And in the work that we do working with young people, and I want to mention the project that we're working on, we're working with a high school in Southeast San Diego, or along the border region. It's like the southmost high school. And we're building a farm on their site. And as we're talking with these students, I want to both implement a sense of, possibility and hope, but also a sense of reality. Like, these are the challenges that you might face if you decide to go and become a farmer or follow a career in agriculture or conservation. And talking to them about history is really important. I think history is supposed to teach us so that we learn, and it doesn't always happen with humans, but I do think it's important to know. And for anyone listening that isn't familiar with agriculture in California, it's huge. I think I don't know if it's true, but what I read is that agriculture in California is the single largest economy in the U.S. And the agriculture in California is bigger than any nation. What we bring in, what we generate. And so this is an important topic. We're not only feeding people, but we're generating health and wellness for our communities. So, yeah. Lots to talk about. And so I'm excited for the guests that we're going to have, because what I'm really hoping, and I know that we've talked about this, having a diverse set of guests that can address this issue from multiple perspectives, from the native tribal perspective to the policy perspective to the community organizing, and also the farmers. What do the farmers have to say about this? Small scale farmers.
Yeah. One kind of eye-opening podcast that I listen to, and it's called Farmer-Rama.
Farmer-Rama, okay.
Yeah. So they put together a series, and it was about this topic, about how did people originally own land. And one of the hosts of the Farmer-Rama, one of the gentlemen, he grew up in Scotland, and he moved to England, and then but he grew up in Scotland, and his father their family they were farmers, ranchers, huge land, goes back hundreds of years, and it was all handed down generation by generation. But this gentleman never really knew when did they first get the land? How did this ever work? How does their family actually end up with all this land? And he decided, he started learning about organic agriculture and thought, I think I want to go back to the family land and maybe see if I can transition it to organic ranching and holistic ranching. So as he went back, he was curious, asked his dad, how did we really end up with this land? And then the story that unfolded was a super dark, sad story. And so he decided this needs to be documented. So he, along with some other hosts of that podcast, Farmer-Rama, they put together a whole series of podcasts called Landed. So, and that's this is one of the topics I've read about and just curious about for a long time, but that was just jaw-dropping.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this has happened everywhere. There's been things that, just like you mentioned, that the government of the United States handed land over to big industries to just to kind of like to expand capitalism throughout the U.S. and was it their land to give? You know, all kinds of it didn't just happen here. It's kind of happened in many places, and there were some really dark things that happened, and that's why people actually were given land. They did a task for the government, and it was a dark story. And in fact, a lot of it's actually suppressed. It's like, we don't want to know. It's this dark side, so they don't want to share it actually. But I think it's just something that it's part of human history that I think we should be aware of.
Yeah.
And can we do anything about the past? No, but we definitely can learn a lot about it, a lot to help make really good, sound decisions and fair decisions moving forward. Because, yeah, it's we need to. It's all about fairness and doing the best we can. And we can't just like hand land over to people because, I mean, it's if you really think about it, owning land is a myth. You know, when we leave this planet, we don't like take anything with us.
Yeah.
So it's such an odd thing. So yeah, but I'd recommend that viewers check out that podcast.
Farmerama.
Farmerama, their landed series is like, and landed means if you're a landed individual. It's like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
And you know, these terms around the earth, soil, this is one of those terms. And if you're, like I said, if you're a landed individual, that means that you come from a family that has land, and now you are just given, you either inherit it or you're given land. And on the flip side, if you're unlanded, you're from a culture that has never owned land, and you may never own land. You have to just be a worker somewhere, and you can't really have this permanent connection to a place.
Yeah.
And very interesting. So,
you know, and so to that point, from your perspective, Paul, how do you think storytelling, and this podcast in particular, can really help us shift the narrative around who has access to land?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And if you think about it, you know, I've put a lot of thought into this whole concept, notion of storytelling. And the more you look into it, the more you find, wow, this is how we shared information and our belief systems and our morals and knowledge, and we passed it down through generation after generation. It was also a form of entertainment and a form of expression and an art form, storytelling, and it's woven into all parts of our life. And it's one of those things where, original storytelling was in a group setting where people are present, actually right there. There's nothing written down. There's just something that's being expressed personally by one or a few people. And you're seeing everything. You're hearing their voice. You're hearing what the content of what they're saying. You're hearing the emotion in their voice, and you're hearing the fine details. And then it's not just their voice, but it's their face, their entire body. It's we know that language isn't just something we hear, but it's something we're experiencing face to face, the human experience. And when we're truly learning something, we're hardwired to be present with it. It's like when someone's sharing it, and that's one thing that I've learned over the years. We could read something, get quite a bit out of it, especially if someone's a really good writer, or it could be something that's recorded and we hear it, and we probably get more out of it because we can hear the tone in their voice and the emotion in their voice. But as soon as we actually see somebody's face and all their expressions, we can, there's so much more we're getting from it. So that is all woven into storytelling about everything that has to do with human culture. And it's interesting, not just, when I think about storytelling, it's not just people telling stories, but there's our non-human relatives. They're telling us stories. So every seed from that we that our ancestors developed, they created these things by interacting with nature and molding it so that plant benefited and we benefited. Just like the creation of corn is like the most amazing story that could ever be told. And it's what cultures are made of from that plant. But at the same time, the plant benefited because we carried it everywhere across every journey. It was brought with us, and it was handed to other cultures, and they again recreated again. So yeah, storytelling, I think that's one of the things that's really it's a human thing, and we'll never it'll never go away. That'll never be entered into AI.
I was just thinking that. I'm like, oh no, is AI going to take over and
No way.
be our new storytellers now? I don't think so.
Because it's there's a part of me really likes the word AI because it's artificial intelligence, and the key word is artificial. Yeah. It's not real.
Yeah.
So, but real intelligence is from nature and our interaction with it, and how we share in stories with each other. So I think the storytelling part of our evolution is it's ingrained in us, and it's really required, and I think we should practice it more. And,
yeah, that's what we're going to do here.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it touches at the heart of what we want to talk about, right? Stories connect us. And when we talk about land access and we talk about the policies, it can feel so disheartening and so overwhelming. And it's easy to feel powerless as a citizen when you know that the government can take your land whenever they want, if it's for public good, right? But when we share stories and we can build empathy. I do think empathy is a muscle we have to practice. So stories help us develop that, which is something we really need in the world right now, is more empathy and consideration towards each other. And so I'm excited for our audience, for everyone listening, to really build empathy with us and an understanding of how we can support one another to build, grow our roots, culturally, historically, and personally. It all ties back to the land, and that's what connects us. Something I learned at farm school when I started going to farm school at Wild Willow was we all maybe come from different cultures, different backgrounds, but we all need food. And all of our ancestors, in one form or another, grew food in order for us to be sitting here and standing here today.
They were really good at it.
They were.
If they weren't good at it,
thank you, ancestors.
We wouldn't be here. Yeah, excellent.
Yeah. We're looking forward to what's ahead. In the coming episodes, we'll be talking with farmers, landowners, beginning farmers, and organizations who are leading the way in supporting equitable access to land and sustainable farming practices.
On our next episode, we will hear from Sierra Reese, Land Equity Project Manager with UC Agriculture and Natural Resources, who's passionate about climate resilience, land justice, and empowering communities.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us on the Shared Roots podcast. We hope today's conversation offered insight, inspiration, and a deeper connection to our community. Be sure to subscribe, leave us a comment, and share this episode with someone who might be inspired by these stories. Until next time, keep nurturing your roots, because our stories grow stronger when we share them together. I'm Areli Perez.
I'm Paul Maschka.
See you next time.
See you next time.